And I think they're right by saying it really is too early to say. But one interesting thing when we're taking a look at the governor's race, right now, as you said, Rick Jackson in the lead. But if we go and we look historically at what happened during the original primary, Burt Jones had this southeastern part of the state. And when we look at where the votes that have been calculated thus far are coming in from, a lot of that is going towards Rick Jackson. So these could just be early votes that are being tabulated. This could shift, or because Burt Jones got both the, the endorsement of Trump and of Kemp, it could be Jackson's base saying, you know what? Hey, we're going to get out there. We're going to vote. I mean, so there really are, again, just looking back historically, you can see, we had a crowded field in this governor's race. And so there are a lot of votes out there to be had. And I think what we're going to see tonight is just which of these individuals, which in each of these runoff races were successful in getting people to get out and vote. Because, I mean, early voting in the primary was about half of all votes cast. But if we're going to look at early voting for this runoff, only about 7% of registered voters came out for early voting this time around. So not quite the same number. So again, it's going to be who got them out to the polls and got that interest going. When we look at the Senate race, a really, really tight race. And what we're going to be looking at here as we look county by county is who has that southeastern part of the state again, because this was Buddy Carter's territory where he took this during the primary, but all of these voters are now up for grabs. So it is going to be interesting to see as the votes come in tonight, who ends up taking this part of the state right now. Mike Collins coming in ahead, but again, a very, very, very early point in time as we're calculating these votes, and we're going to be keeping an eye on just which of these counties switch. The one thing I will say that's good, Fulton County votes already starting to come in. If you remember back in the primary, we had to wait until 11 o'clock at night to start getting any of those votes. So tonight, we're already starting to see them come in. Maybe we'll get answers earlier in the evening.
Rebecca, I was going to ask you about that. Do we know how much or to what extent we're seeing anything from Fulton at this point?
I think the fact that we're seeing anything is good news. I mean, if we were to zoom in here, we can see that they're saying about 43% of the estimated total vote, but zero total precincts reporting. So again, a small number that have come in, but I think it's just a good sign that we are getting those calculations, those votes in this early in the evening.
All right, Rebecca, I know you're going to be with us all evening, county by county, giving us an update. We appreciate that.
And a pretty big runoff in Fulton County as well for the commission chair race. So we will see what shakes out with Mo Ivory and current chairman Rob Pitts as well. We want to move back to our Georgia Votes panel. Zach and Faith, a lot to take in there from the information that we heard from Rebecca.
Absolutely, and we have those numbers right in front of us. Zach is going to steer the ship for you while we can look to see which numbers we are getting from those counties as they continue to come in. And we want to bring in our panel here, too, to discuss this. Stephen mentioned something when we were in break or just waiting to come on here, that these numbers are going to change time and time again. So just can you explain to us what you're seeing right now as we pull up this map?
Yeah, well, first of all, I mean, let's be clear. I mean, I think this is going to be a tight race. I think what we're seeing on this U.S. Senate race, that this is going to be tight. The numbers are going to change. What we're seeing right now is we have a big dump of early votes from metro Atlanta counties, which is not only going to favor Derek Dooley, but also Rick Jackson. Sure. And so as you see those, not only those election day votes come in for those metro counties, but also these other rural counties, I think that the ground may shift a little bit. Now, that's not to say that it will not continue to be this tight the rest of the way, but you're going to see some fluctuations here, I think, over the next 30 minutes to an hour.
And if we can take this map shot, our producer's in the back, so you all can see what we're seeing. There it is on our computer there. Fred, I mean, Stephen's pointing out something very important in all of these different vote totals coming in. My question to you is, I know it's still too early, but as we're looking at this, people across the country are looking at this way specifically to see where does this power lie? You have a Trump candidate and a Kemp candidate. Keep in mind, both of these guys are on their way out, but they still have a lot of influence over the Republican Party.
For sure. And I agree with Stephen that these numbers will change some, but I think, and to Stephen's point, with the interior or the metro counties reporting a lot of the votes early on, this is not where Derek Dooley wants to be. I would think that Derek Dooley will want to be a little bit higher than where he is right now, 55, 56%. You know, as the rural areas come in, that's a place where President Trump has historically done really well, and Mike Collins is President Trump's candidate. As a Democrat, what we're watching for and looking for is what is the turnout going to look like in these areas? Are there places where turnout is lower than expected? Could that indicate some softening in Republican support as we start looking at a pathway for Senator Ossoff and Mayor Bottoms and the Democratic ticket in November? But that being said, this is very, very, very interesting. Remember, we had about 309,000 early votes cast for Republicans. So if these are early vote numbers, we're about halfway there. You know, this is a very, very, very tight race. And Mike Collins is sitting in good position, I think, right now.
Close, still early. Stephen, I want to bring you in. As we've been discussing kind of off air, there have been two themes that keep coming up again and again, and they're geographic ones. A real focus on the importance of this part of the map and of this part of the map. Explain for folks who maybe are just tuning in, maybe just clocking into the really in the weeds of Georgia politics, why is the coastline really important in this Senate runoff, and why is the metro area really important?
Yeah, a couple different points. One, the coastline is very important because, as you remember, that is a district represented by Congressman Buddy Carter, who ran in this primary and came in third place and was not successful in advancing to the runoff. One of the big questions coming in was, where would his votes go? Would they, and what does the break look like? Would they break more heavily for Mike Collins or Derek Dooley, and what does that?
Or would they even stay home? Because that was the other kind of third category, right?
Correct. Yeah, I think you're always going to see some sort of siphoning percentage there. And then with Metro Atlanta, relatively, we know Derek Dooley outperformed Mike Collins in that. We know that is a heavy concentration of votes. And we know that Brian Kemp, who does very well in Metro Atlanta with suburban voters, has endorsed Derek Dooley and has been on television heavily outspending Mike Collins in Metro Atlanta. So I do think that is a good point of advantage for Derek Dooley. But to Fred's point, you're really going to want to see higher margins for Derek Dooley in those as we get, I mean, to me, that's a big question right now over the next hour. On these election day votes that come in Metro Atlanta counties, what is that split for Derek Dooley? I think he's really going to have to run it up there to balance the rural part of the state that will go for Mike Collins.
Let's take a look at some of those percentages if we want. We want to go county by county here. We can. Fulton County, you look at Derek Dooley, at this point, 43% of the estimated total vote right now, 62% for Dooley, 37.5% for Collins. Go over DeKalb, 63%, let's call it, for Dooley. Gwinnett over here, 59% for Dooley. Forsyth, 53%. Cherokee, 55%. And it seems at this early juncture, guys, correct me if I'm wrong, but the further you get out, even just to the suburbs, not even talking exurbs, that support, at this early juncture, 7:33, so still really early, we're going to timestamp this, but you can see a little bit of that support at this juncture weakening the further out you get from the core of downtown Atlanta.
And just adding to that, and I didn't want to cut you off, but adding to that, I had a thought that when you're thinking about how these two gentlemen campaigned, Mike Collins was always this America First MAGA candidate with Buddy Carter. Derek Dooley didn't go that route as hard. He always said that he would get along with President Trump. There was no beef there per se, but he was never that America First candidate. Will those rural Republicans, that's the question, will they convene towards that Mike Collins messaging or that Derek Dooley messaging?
Yeah, I mean, and then that's part of the question. And as we talked about in looking at these numbers, Zach, you're seeing a pretty consistent theme that about 45% of the votes in those counties is what's reporting. That is most likely early voting numbers, a little less than half. And again, I go back to a point Fred made. You're seeing Derek Dooley at like a 55-45 clip in some of those counties. I think he would have liked for that to be closer to 60-40, because when you get those election day voters in, Derek Dooley's probably still going to be winning them, but probably not as a great of a margin as he was winning with the early vote. So a dynamic to watch for sure.
Yeah.
We want to turn our attention now over to the other big race tonight. There are a number of them, but the two real headline grabbers right now are, of course, the Senate runoff and the governor's runoff. If we turn our attention over to the governor's race right now, this is, and let's zoom back out here, statewide, still early, about 185,000 votes in total recorded across the state right now. That's about a quarter of the estimated total vote. And again, that is an estimate made, but you can expect about, 75% of the votes still to come in. At this point, Rick Jackson sitting about 60%, Burt Jones sitting about 40%. Early juncture here, but if we kind of look at the geography test again, Jackson out in the lead in the whole metro area here and down in Savannah as well. You look at kind of some of the other more urban areas of the state. 7:36 in the evening. A lot can change at this point. Fred and Stephen, Fred, we'll start with you. I see a knowing nod as you look at this. What do you make of this?
Well, there's a lot of gold on the screen for a person who's dropped a lot of gold in this race.
Bars.
But bars, right? But what's really surprising to me is you look at the areas around Athens, Clarke County, a place where around UGA, where you would think that Burt Jones would do really well, given his ties to the university, playing football there, and all of that. That's those areas are breaking for Rick Jones. And then when you look at Middle Georgia, you have Macon, but those areas, Houston County, the places going down 75 there, those rural areas. Those are also areas that should be Burt Jones country. I just drove it last week and saw a lot of Burt Jones signs, not a lot of Rick Jackson signs, but Rick Jackson at this stage is doing really well there. This is not a good sign for Burt Jones. And I think, going back to what we talked a little bit off air, the fact that Governor Kemp endorsed on Sunday, but he allowed those commercials that implied that he was supporting Rick Jackson to run for 2 whole weeks.
All throughout early voting.
All throughout early voting. I think this speaks to that, because Rick Jackson is doing far better than in those areas than I think he would have done otherwise.
Yeah, and I want to pick up on that because Fred's absolutely right. There in those first 2 weeks after the primary, during the runoff campaign, the Jones campaign went relatively dark on television. Whereas Rick Jackson really, I thought, put the pedal to the metal. They had some fresh ads featuring an endorsement from Chris Carr, featuring his grandkids, a puppy, a truck, right? And again, I agree with Fred. I think if you're Rick Jackson, you're liking the way that this is looking early. Again, with the caveat that it is early, and this will tighten for sure. Let me be very clear. This will tighten, but that's a sizable early lead for Rick Jackson.
The question is, how much will it tighten? Because keep in mind, we saw something similar to this, a lot more people in the race, but on the Democratic side, former Atlanta Mayor Keisha Lance Bottoms, she had a very early and very wide lead. And the question throughout the night, of course, waiting for those Fulton County numbers, will this tighten enough for her to avoid a runoff? But that early, I can't remember how many percentage points, but I think it was about 20 percentage points, and that just kept growing and growing. So will this tighten? Will it tighten to the point where we will see Burt Jones actually flip? That is the question. But looking at these numbers, even in rural Georgia, there's a lot of gold there.
That's the point. That's what I'm looking at right here, is that Rick Jackson appears to be holding his own in rural Georgia. And again, knowing that some of these are early votes, but even still, that's a pretty good sign early for Rick Jackson.
And it is, we're mostly looking at early votes at this point, you can presume. And there's still a lot of blank space out there in central Georgia as you get towards the coastline. A lot of counties still to come in. Is there any indication, Fred, we'll start with you, is there ever an occasion in Georgia politics where early voters break one way and then day of voters tend to trend in a different direction?
Not that significantly. You might see a 3 to 5 point swing, say someone could weigh 53, 54% of the early vote, and they might flip the other direction, but you're not going to see, you don't usually see like a 10-point swing. And the other thing is, while there's a lot of white out there, a lot of white spaces, a lot of counties that are not yet reporting, there are not a lot of votes in those counties. Georgia has 159 counties, but the votes really are kind of concentrated in about 20, 25 counties. And so, to Stephen's point, if you're Rick Jackson, you've got to feel really good about the way this is looking right now. And something that Stephen talked about before as well is that Governor Kemp endorsed Burt Jones Sunday. That didn't leave a lot of time for the campaign to mobilize and get that word out. It required also an awful lot of money to get that out there.
And so, on the money point, keep in mind, Rick Jackson has spent $100 million so far. So back to Fred's bar, maybe the gold is displaying this gold on the map. We'll see. Just a reminder, guys, we're the only station covering this live for you, bringing you these real-time results as we get them. So make sure that you are sticking with us, because when they come, we'll be bringing it to you.